In October 2025, Julie Andrews quietly passed the milestone of turning 90, a number that, for many admirers, evokes both deep respect and an indescribable sense of nostalgia. There was no red carpet, no stage, no thunderous applause like in years gone by. The woman who once enchanted the world with her crystal-clear soprano voice across the hills of Austria, the woman who turned an umbrella and a magical carpet bag into timeless cinematic symbols, now lives a completely different life. Quiet, private, and to many people that sounds sad. The contrast is difficult to ignore. An icon who once shone beneath thousands of lights has now withdrawn from all the noise of Hollywood. A singer once celebrated for a remarkable 4-octave vocal range no longer sings. A name that once appeared on every newspaper page now sometimes disappears from public view for years at a time. For those who grew up with Mary Poppins, with The Sound of Music, with her voice echoing through generations, this silence carries a feeling that is difficult to describe. It is like watching a brilliant flame slowly draw inward until it becomes a glowing ember, still present but no longer blazing in the way people once knew. But is it really sad? Or is it something more complex? A story of loss, adaptation, and ultimately, peace. To understand Julie Andrews at 90, we must begin much earlier, when she was not yet a star, but simply a child with a voice that seemed impossible to explain. Some stars are created by luck, by circumstance, by meeting the right person at exactly the right moment. And then there are people like Julie Andrews, people who seem not to have become stars, but to have carried that quality within them from the very beginning. She did not become famous in the conventional sense. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no chance discovery on a street corner. Instead, she appeared before audiences as though extraordinary talent were the most natural thing in the world. A child stepping onto a stage and leaving an entire auditorium breathless, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but simply because she could not be anything else. Yet behind that natural brilliance stood a foundation of discipline, built through extraordinarily demanding years. As a child, Julie Andrews performed in music halls throughout Britain, venues that showed no mercy, where audiences would openly boo if a performer failed to deliver, and where no allowances were made simply because an artist was young. It was in that unforgiving environment that she learned what no classroom could ever teach: how to control her voice under immense pressure, how to remain calm when an entire audience was waiting in anticipation, and most importantly, how to turn discipline into instinct so that, regardless of who sat before her, she could remain completely herself. Her talent was recognized by industry professionals from a very early age. While still in her teens, people within the profession used words rarely reserved for young performers to describe her: astonishingly gifted, remarkably commanding on stage. These were not polite compliments, but genuine recognition from people who had watched hundreds of talents come and go and understood that every so often someone truly exceptional appeared. Her voice, so pure it was compared to crystal, and so expansive that it stretched across 4 octaves, was only the visible tip of an iceberg whose hidden mass consisted of diligence, focus, and devotion to her craft. Qualities she had been developing long before she was old enough to fully understand their significance. It was this foundation, not luck, not accidental fame, that ultimately shaped the person Julie Andrews would become. When success arrived, it came to someone who had been ready for it for years. And when life's harshest challenges eventually confronted her, it would be that same foundation that kept her standing strong. If there was ever a role that truly belonged to Julie Andrews in the deepest sense of the phrase, it was Eliza Doolittle in the Broadway production of My Fair Lady. She did far more than simply portray the character. She breathed life into her, transforming a rough flower seller into a woman of dignity through a rare combination of flawless vocal technique and raw emotional vulnerability. So authentic that Broadway audiences did not merely watch the character's journey, but felt every layer of emotion night after night. It was the kind of artistry that cannot be learned from books. It can only emerge from years of rigorous dedication and a soul sensitive enough to understand that the stage is not a place to perform, but a place to live truthfully. And yet, when My Fair Lady was adapted into a motion picture, Hollywood turned its back on her. The decision to cast Audrey Hepburn as Eliza Doolittle, although Hepburn was undeniably talented, was ultimately a commercial one. The producers wanted a name with proven worldwide box office appeal, a face that cinema audiences already knew. Julie Andrews, despite having built the very soul of the role through hundreds of stage performances, was still considered not famous enough by Hollywood standards at the time. It was a public rejection witnessed by the entire entertainment industry, and for many artists, such an experience could have become a wound that never truly healed. But Julie Andrews was not like most artists. Rather than allowing that disappointment to consume her, she transformed it into motivation. Hollywood's rejection did not break her spirit. Instead, it strengthened her discipline and sense of purpose, as though she were quietly proving that an artist's true value is not determined by being chosen or overlooked, but by what they do afterwards. She did not rush into the next opportunity merely to soothe a bruised ego. She waited, patiently, confidently, and with discipline, exactly as the British music halls had taught her from childhood. And that patience, as history would later prove, was richly rewarded. Because what awaited her was not merely another role, it was something that would transform her into an icon for an entire generation. Sometimes life has a way of turning apparent injustices into perfect stepping stones. Just as Hollywood seemed to close its doors to Julie Andrews, Walt Disney, a man of extraordinary vision, opened another one, wider and brighter than anything she could have imagined. He offered her a role unlike anything audiences had ever seen before, a magical nanny who could fly with an umbrella, step into paintings, and transform ordinary moments into extraordinary adventures. That role was Mary Poppins, and it was also the moment when every year of Julie Andrews' preparation came together at once. Her voice, her acting ability, her grace, her command of an audience, all converged at precisely the right moment, as though the character had been created specifically for her. The success of Mary Poppins was not merely a box office triumph, it became a cultural phenomenon. Audiences around the world embraced her not because she tried to charm them, but because she brought something genuine and comforting to the often artificial world of Hollywood. Then, only a year later, The Sound of Music elevated her to an entirely new level. The image of Julie Andrews standing on the Austrian hillsides with her arms outstretched, her voice soaring beneath a brilliant blue sky, became one of the most recognizable moments in cinema history. She was no longer simply an actress or a singer. She had become a symbol of elegance, pure joy, and musical excellence at its highest form. What made her achievement even more remarkable was that she entered Hollywood not as a fortunate newcomer, but as a fully formed artist. While many stars matured under the spotlight of cinema, Julie Andrews had already matured long before that. In Britain's bustling music halls, through countless Broadway performances, and through the pain of rejection itself. All those pressures and challenges created something that neither wealth nor fame could purchase: complete preparation. When genuine opportunity finally arrived, she did not need to learn how to shine. She simply stepped forward and did what she had spent her entire life doing. And the world, seeing Julie Andrews on the silver screen for the first time, immediately understood that they were witnessing something extraordinarily rare. Not merely a talented performer, but a legend being born before their very eyes. In every artist's life, there are losses that can eventually be overcome. A rejected role, a failed film, a quiet period in a career. But there are also losses that strike at the very core of identity. Losses so profound that they take away not merely part of a career, but part of the person themselves. For Julie Andrews, that loss was her voice. The gift that had accompanied her since childhood. The gift that opened every door. The gift for which the world loved her. And the gift that disappeared forever, following a surgical procedure that was supposed to be routine. At the end of the 1990s, Julie Andrews underwent a medical procedure intended to correct problems with her larynx, small nodules on her vocal cords that doctors believed could be treated through surgery. It was a reasonable decision, a risk that seemed manageable. But what no one anticipated happened. The operation not only failed to solve the problem, but also caused permanent damage to her vocal cords. Her legendary four-octave soprano voice, the voice people compared to something made of light and fresh air itself, never returned. It did not gradually weaken with time, nor fade with age. It vanished suddenly, coldly, and irreversibly, leaving behind a void that nothing could fill. To understand the cruelty of this loss, one must understand that for Julie Andrews, singing was never merely a profession. It was her first language, the way she communicated with the world before she even understood what the world was. From the days when she was a child, standing on small stages across Britain, her voice defined her both in the eyes of others and in her own eyes. Losing that voice was like losing a part of her identity, like a painter suddenly losing their sight, a writer forgetting language, or a dancer no longer feeling music. The pain was not simply that she could no longer do what she loved. It was that every morning she had to confront the question, if that voice is gone, who am I now? And this is the truth that many people misunderstand about Julie Andrews. The reason she gradually stepped away from musicals and from the musical stages to which she had devoted her life was not simply because of age or because she no longer wished to perform. It was because the very thing that had made Julie Andrews who she was on those stages was no longer there. She had too much self-respect to step onto a stage as a lesser version of herself, and enough courage to accept a reality that many people would spend a lifetime denying. It was not surrender. It was the deepest form of honesty an artist can offer both to their craft and to the admirers who loved them for that authenticity. There is a kind of courage that people rarely speak about. Not the courage to face challenges, but the courage to accept that one chapter of life has ended and ask, what comes next? For many artists, losing the thing that defined them means losing everything. But Julie Andrews proved the opposite, that a person with sufficient depth and discipline is never defined solely by a skill or a voice. When the door to music closed, she did not stand there lamenting her loss. She turned around and searched for other doors with the calm composure of someone who had been facing pressure since childhood. One of the first paths she chose was writing children's books. And this was not the impulsive decision of a star searching for a way to fill spare time. She collaborated with her daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton, to create books infused with the warmth and humanity that audiences had always loved in her on screen. Those books were not glamorous or attention-seeking, but they touched children's hearts in a way that only people who truly understand innocence and beauty can achieve. It was another form of storytelling, not through music, not through song, but still unmistakably marked by Julie Andrews on every page. At the same time, she found a new role on screen, no longer the central figure of the story, but a guide and mentor. Her portrayal of Queen Clarice in The Princess Diaries introduced her to an entirely new generation of viewers, children growing up in the early 2000s who had never known Mary Poppins or Maria von Trapp, yet adored her as an elegant, witty, and loving grandmother figure. Then her narration in Bridget Jones's Diary, warm, humorous, and captivating, reminded the world that even without singing, Julie Andrews' voice remained something extraordinary, still capable of making people pause and listen. What is most admirable about this period is not the list of films she appeared in or the books she wrote, but the attitude she brought to all of them. She did not attempt to recreate former glory, nor cling to the images of Mary Poppins or Maria in order to remain relevant. Instead, she embraced a completely different role. No longer the center of the story, but a guide, a mentor, someone standing behind the scenes and passing the spotlight to younger generations. It was a transition that required both humility and confidence. Humility to let go of stardom, and confidence to know that her worth did not depend upon it. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson Julie Andrews' life offers anyone watching. That true greatness is not about remaining at the summit forever, but about continuing to create meaningful things after you have stepped away from it, continuing to be yourself, and continuing to give something unique that only you can offer. When a star of Julie Andrews' stature gradually retreats into a private life, the outside world rarely accepts that silence calmly. People begin filling the void with speculation, rumors, and stories woven from very little factual information. And for Julie Andrews, who sometimes disappeared from public view for as long as 3 years without any announcement or explanation, those rumors found fertile ground. Yet the truth, as is often the case, is far simpler and far less dramatic than people imagine. She did not disappear because of illness, nor withdraw because of unhappiness. She simply chose to live the life she wanted, a genuinely quiet and private life. At 90 years old, Julie Andrews rarely appears in public, and that is entirely by choice. After spending a lifetime beneath stage lights, in front of cameras, and in the sight of millions of admirers, privacy is not something she was forced to accept. It is something she deliberately sought and deeply values. Not everyone understands this, especially in an era where social media presence is often treated as proof of existence. But Julie Andrews belongs to a different generation and a different philosophy, one in which dignity is sometimes expressed best through silence, and where not every moment of life needs to be shared with the world. One of the most persistent rumors concerning her health has been speculation about Parkinson's disease. These rumors began circulating after she shared a message supporting research into the condition, an entirely normal humanitarian gesture that was misinterpreted as evidence of a personal diagnosis. The reality is that to date there has been no official announcement that Julie Andrews has Parkinson's disease, and caring about a medical condition does not mean one suffers from it. This is the kind of hasty assumption that the media and social networks frequently make when discussing elderly public figures, and in Julie Andrews' case, it has created a distorted and overly sympathetic image of a woman who is, in fact, living a full and meaningful life. Those close to her describe her health at 90 as stable and mentally sharp. There are the ordinary aches and pains of old age. She occasionally uses a walking stick when moving around. But these are the normal biological realities of someone who has lived for 9 decades, not signs of collapse or tragedy, as some tabloids prefer to suggest. Her mind remains sharp, her creativity remains active, and most importantly, she is still working. Together with her daughter Emma Walton Hamilton, she has been completing her latest book, Shy, scheduled for publication in August 2026. Perhaps the clearest evidence that Julie Andrews at 90 is not someone waiting for time to pass, but someone who continues to create, contribute, and live exactly as she chooses. Perhaps what the public finds hardest to accept is not that she is frail or unhappy, but that she is perfectly well, simply in a way they are not accustomed to seeing in a star. There is no tearful farewell performance, no lengthy memoir interviews, no grand public appearance designed to remind the world of who she is. There is simply a 90-year-old woman living quietly, working alongside her daughter, and allowing the world to decide for itself what that means. If Julie Andrews' story has touched you in some way, leave a comment below. Which role do you remember her for most vividly? Mary Poppins, Maria von Trapp, or Queen Clarice? And don't forget to like this video if you believe her life deserves to be known by even more people. Then share it with a friend who you think would appreciate this story.